Welcome back. Let's think about the effect of a market shock on revenue, but let's look at it from two different perspectives, a short-run perspective and a long-run perspective. So let's look at the market for oil. So we want to look at the market for oil. And for our event, for our shock, let's assume that oil producers try the collude to push up prices. So our event is that oil producers collude to reduce supply. So their idea is let's collude, reduce supply, and see if we can push up prices. So what's the effect of that? So let's set up our model. And the first case we're going to look at is what's the initial effect of this. So we want to look at the short run first. And then we'll look at the long run. So we've got quantity, price. We've got an inelastic demand for oil in the short run, right? So demand is a pretty steep curve in the short run. And we've got to put in a supply curve. So toss in a supply curve and we'll label in our initial equilibrium. So we'll call it P1 and Q1. So where is our revenue initially? It's this rectangle below price up the quantity. So it's this rectangle. And then oil producers collude, trying to reduce supply. So how do we model that? We've got our three-step process. First step, which curve? Well, clearly this is a story about supply. Which direction? Well, they're colluding to reduce supply, so supply shifts left. So let's shift supply to the left. We'll draw in our new supply curve, and we want to see now what happens to price, quantity, and revenue. So with supply having shifted left on a pretty inelastic demand curve, we see that price has increased considerably and quantity has barely budged at all. Yeah, it decreased, but not very much. So what's our overall effect? So price increased, quantity decreased, and those together means that revenue increased, right? So the effect of this price increase is greater than the effect of the quantity decrease, which means that revenue has increased. Now remember, this is the short run. So we could even mark our process. This is our short run results. But what happens in the long run? So let's take a look at it. Are oil producers effective at pushing up prices and raising their profits by colluding? So if we think about price, quantity, now what's the difference in the demand curve between the short run and the long run? In the short run, demand for oil, gasoline, etc. is pretty inelastic because we don't have a good substitute. But given enough time, people can move closer to work, they can figure out how to commute on bicycle, they can carpool, they can rearrange the way they run errands, etc. So over time, in the long run, the demand curve is much less inelastic. It's more elastic. So a small change in price has a bigger effect on quantity than in the short run, where a big change in price has a very small effect on quantity. All right, so what's our result of this? So this is our long run model. So we've got to add a supply curve to it. And what were our three steps? Which curve? Supply. Which direction? Well, they're still colluding to try and reduce supply. So our third step, draw it in and see what happens. All right, so where did we start out before this shock happened? Mark that in. So we've got our initial price. We can call it P1, Q1. And then we said the supply curve shifts to the left. This collusion is reducing supply. So now what happened in the long run? Well, price didn't move very much, and quantity moved quite a bit. So what's our effect in the long run? Prices are still increasing, but quantity is decreasing much more than in the short run. So our effect on revenue, and here's where maybe this diagram oversimplifies it or seems too certain, right? Revenue is uncertain. Why is it uncertain? Well, it depends on how elastic demand is in that long run. Is long run really long enough that demand becomes very elastic, or is it just sort of a middle case? We don't actually know. When demand is inelastic, like in the short run, certainly you see revenue increase if these producers collude. But in the long run, it's a much more uncertain result. Producers have been ineffective at colluding and pushing up oil prices because we adjust. Our cars become more fuel efficient, people move closer to work, etc. So revenue is uncertain, and what does it depend on? It depends on the elasticity of demand in the long run. Of demand in the long run. This is where economics is fun, right? You're thinking, no, it's confusing. No, it's kind of fun to think about some of these things. Well, what happens in the short run? Does that continue? Can these producers keep it up? Can they continue to push prices up forever? Or do buyers change their habits and this is only a short run effect? Hopefully you're starting to get a feel for at least how we can look at this in a supply and demand diagram and thinking about how elastic is demand in the short run versus the long run is different for every good and part of the fun of economics. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.